You single-handedly brought
Yeah,
down
yeah.
Nortel. You were single-handedly
Yep, I did
responsible
that.
for the failure of Nortel. Great.
I think it's after 20 years, it's okay, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm not gonna get sued anymore.
Yeah, it's all good. Welcome to Beverages, Bites, and Banter. This is a show where Spencer and I talk about the most important things in life. Things like coffee and tequila and technology. Things like important life lessons that we've learned over the years. Basically, almost any topic is fair game. For today, though, we're joined by Myk Shaforostov, who is the founder of his new startup and currently lives in Sydney, Australia. Myk, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jim. Long time no talk.
Yeah, it's been a while. So for the listeners, Myk and I worked together at a startup many years ago now, 5+ years ago. So that was quite a fun ride. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So I think where we want to start off with is always the most important question. What are you guys drinking? Myk, why don't you tell us what you're drinking first?
Well, since I'm representing the Pacific on the other side of the world, I'm actually drinking a very special, unique type of coffee today. I kind of, ruined the package a little bit, but this is called, Kupi Luwak.
Is that a picture of a Wolverine on the cover? What is that thing on the cover?
It's almost like a Tasmanian devil.
Oh, a Tasmanian devil, yeah.
No, it's not. It's not, though. This is not Australian. So this is from Indonesia.
Oh, okay.
You could typically find this in Bali. And it's very, very expensive coffee, but not for the reasons that you think. It's because effectively this little guy here eats the beans of the coffee and then shits them out.
Okay. Yes, I've heard of this coffee before. So how's that tasting for you?
It tastes like shit. Okay, what do you expect it to taste like?
It's the best shit you ever drank.
Yeah.
It tastes like normal coffee, like drip coffee, if I'm honest. So it's not really worth the price, especially once you realize what's in it.
Right. Hopefully it's well washed. All right. Well, that's exciting. That's a first on this show for sure. Thanks for bringing that.
Yeah, I've had that once. It's interesting for sure.
Spencer, why don't you tell us what you're drinking today? Hopefully it's not. No.
I am not drinking coffee today, although I have had that type once, and it is interesting. But I agree, not quite worth the price, but worth the experience. I am drinking a jalapeno roasted pineapple margarita from my local Mexican restaurant because I have some leftover and super thirsty.
That sounds amazing. Jalapeno roasted pineapple margarita.
Yes.
They roast the pineapple. Wow. That's pretty cool. I love
So it makes it very sweet and caramelized.
Yeah, I love it. I've had pineapple off the grill and it's amazing. It's delicious.
So blend that up, put in margarita. Throw some fresh jalapenos.
I feel a little let down right now, Spencer, because you've been coming to the past few shows with a beverage in each hand. So I was half expecting to see you chugging a bottle of whiskey in the other hand or something. Maybe next time.
Next time.
Yeah. Well, I'll share what I'm drinking. I decided to have some coffee, even though it's after 5:00 here where I live. I'm good with drinking coffee pretty much anytime, day or night. So I am drinking some Evans Brothers coffee. I know, Spencer, that'll be shocking to you. I'll show the bag here. It is a organic, natural Ethiopian Kaon Mountain Farm. And this is actually that coffee when Randy was on the show with us a few episodes ago. This is the coffee he was talking about. And I got a bag of it and it's absolutely phenomenal. I'm not great with tasting notes, so I'm not going to go into that. But I did make a pour over using that very traditional pour over method we spoke about last time on the show, with the 16-to-1 ratio of water to coffee. And I put a little bit of sugar and a little bit of non-dairy creamer in this one. And I normally don't drink it that way. And I've been drinking this just black and it's delicious just black, but I did want to try it with a little bit of sugar and cream. And it's equally as delicious, just different. It changes the character of the coffee. And maybe tomorrow I'm going to drink it black again. And then the next day I might have a little sugar and non-dairy creamer again. Who knows? But absolutely delicious. So
if it's 9 a.m. Somewhere in the world, you should definitely come to Australia to visit because there's a massive coffee culture here in Australia. I was surprised, to be honest.
I did visit Australia once for a few weeks. I went to Melbourne and Sydney, and the coffee was phenomenal there. It was so good. They have a great coffee scene going on in Australia. So maybe I'm going to have to stay with you next time, Myk. I'll invite myself to your house and we'll hang out. He's like, no, you're not. You're not coming to my
You
house.
can, you can stay. You can stay in Amy's room, aka my office, aka her bedroom. So
Okay. So, Mick, you have a 1-year-old. You told me, right?
yeah, 1.5.
1.5.
She's very cute when she smiles.
Yeah. So maybe I won't visit because I left babies behind a very long time ago, and I remember what it's like to have little ones like that, and they're a lot of work. So, congratulations.
Yeah, and she's going through the phases now of like I'm supposed to know and read her mind of what she wants, and I always get it wrong. So I get 20 minutes of crying.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's going to get worse. That's great.
Sign language. More.
More. Yeah.
Sign language is good.
My son loved that sign. He used that all the time. He loved eating. So, all right, let's shift gears a little bit. Mick, I'm going to catch you drinking your coffee here, but why don't you tell us a little bit about your current startup?
Look, it's as any startup, you're being told, and you think when people give you this advice, you're like, oh, mine is going to be different. I'm going to be special. And they say, look, number one, 18 out of 20 will fail, and get funding even if you're lucky, and then burn through all the cash and fail. And they'll say you'll fail many, many, many times. And in fairness, coming from the sales background and experience, you do get used to failure because every customer call is a bit of a new endeavor and new opportunities like that. But I suppose you still kind of think that it's not going to happen to you.
Yeah.
So where am I? We're pivoting right now because we realize that the space we're in, it's very complex, crowded, and perhaps we're not differentiated enough. So we're shifting gears a little bit more towards and I'm going to give out a little bit of a hint, observability for the not just LLM, but just the AI ML space. We're tooling currently is very inadequate. But we started out the endeavor with trying to, jump into a data observability kind of space, which is a pretty interesting space to be in, and also try to bring some of that APM observability experience into the mix. It's very hard, very hard. And quite frankly, you also learn that if you don't have the right people with you, it's really hard to build something on.
Yeah. Yeah. So for whoever's listening, Mick and I were at a company called App Dynamics working together, and App Dynamics was an APM solution that the term has kind of transitioned to observability, similar to what APM used to be. So Mick has that great background, that rich background in these monitoring type of technologies. It's great to hear that you're transitioning into the AI space. We had a show a few episodes ago about AI, and it's really mind-blowing how quickly there are advancements being made in that space. And I could totally see a need for, where you're shifting the company to make sure that the AI is performing properly, responding rapidly, all the things that need to happen to make it a good user experience.
Yeah, you'd be surprised how interesting the space is. You're right, it's growing quite a bit. And in fairness, I mean, I missed the dot-com bubble, I missed the crypto bubble, and I was like, I sure as hell am not going to miss the AI bubble. So I jumped on that bandwagon.
That's wise. That's wise. Well, I'm sure that you are going to create a great solution in that space. And what I'd love to do is talk a little bit about your background. I think you have a really interesting story, Mick. We got to speak a little bit last week about this, and I think it's really important to share that background with our listeners because a lot of people go through this. First of all, thank you for sharing that, you're pivoting the company, and learning from failure is such a critical part. I think every founder that I've ever spoken to has really doubled down on the fact that those initial failures are what lead to their ultimate success, right? Because they learn and they adapt. So it's not so much about failing, it's about what you learn from your failures and moving on. And I think that's a great life lesson in general. And I think, your story, when you shared it with me, I think there was a lot of really good lessons that you had to share through your journey. So why don't you take us back to college, and you really didn't know what you wanted to do, and why don't we start the story back there?
Yeah, and just a quick also level set. I mean, I'm a bit of a kid of the world. I mean, I was born in Ukraine. I was raised in Italy. I was educated in Malta, Switzerland, and then all the way to Canada. So I was at this point in time when I finished college. I love to see so many places, cultures, and things. And when they come to you and say, "Hey, what do you want to do when you grow up?" Let's say in kindergarten, they never tell you, "Hey, do you want to be a sales engineer?" They typically tell you like be a fireman, a doctor, a lawyer, all these cool like jobs, right? A sales engineer. Nobody shows at the parent teacher thing with like, oh, I'm a sales engineer. So I didn't know this existed, and I was lucky enough to fall into a program in Canada. It's a university called Queen's University where they do the undecided year, i.e., you go in there and you do like all types of engineering until you figure out the one you hate the least, because they'll make you do all the worst of every single subject until you literally just hated it the least, and you're like, okay, fine, I'll stay in engineering, and this is the subject I'll do. And I decided to do computers, even though they made you write on paper code. That sounds silly. Why would you write code on paper? And I decided that was not as worse as decanting for hours and hours on end, trying to make a solution of chemicals that change colors.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot of engineering disciplines. I came from an engineering discipline, by the way. That is my background as well. And I actually kind of liked it in college, but then when I got out into the real world, I wasn't such a big fan of the engineering work itself. So that's why I ended up switching. So great. You're going through this program. You found that you hate sales engineering the least. what what happens
No,
next?
actually, it didn't exist there. No, I went as a computer engineer, and
Okay.
then I got picked up by this great company called Nortel Networks.
Yeah,
Many of you probably have heard of it.
sure.
And once I joined, of course, it went downhill. And I did break one of the servers once because I had no training, and I poked it, and it just something went down. It's like, oh, the 3G network in Ottawa, which just went down because of you. I was like, well, maybe I'm not that kind of engineer, the one that builds bridges and stuff, because obviously I break things even in the least important places. But look, I always realized that through my travels and my character, I wanted to do more than just engineering and being a coder in a small room, which is what that job was. I mean, I was super grateful that the opportunity. So I actually decided, like, I didn't know at this point I'm just a computer engineer. I was like, you know what, I want to. This is the time. Remember that the Mark Zuckerberg has become multimillionaire. Google is just blowing up. Norton Network is dying, and I was like, well, let me go and maybe start my own business. And that's my first real big slap of humble when I tried to buy people lunches, beers, coffees, tried to get them to invest in me to start a startup. In this case, it was similar to what now is called Okta. And I was like really passionate about the single sign-on space, and I wanted to build that. And long story short, I got nowhere with that because most of these VCs said to me, hey, you've got cool ideas, you're a smart kid, but you don't have the network, you don't have the experience in the space. And quite frankly, we want to invest in the people who can execute as opposed to great ideas. And so I kind of found myself in my first kind of career, bang, I'm
Yeah.
stuck.
I get where the VCs are coming from, right? That level of experience that you don't have. Now, we've seen so many other examples, though, of people who are like, you know what, I'm not going to listen to your no, and I'm going to go do this thing on my own. And there's, just different paths, right? Neither one is really the correct path. It's like, okay, maybe you listen and maybe you go and build experience, or you say, forget you, I'm just going to go do it on my own. Whether or not it succeeds or not is a different thing, right? So which path did you take? Which one?
I am usually very much against the grain kind of person, but I've learned that sometimes you have to take advice, and I was very very lucky because one of these VCs actually told me. I was driving back home. I was pretty pissed off at the whole thing. It's been weeks of rejections, and this is before I was in sales, so I didn't quite enjoy it. Or not I do now, but
You
I'm
enjoy it
just more
now?
used to it.
Yeah.
No, just thicker skin, and you just expect it. Like when you call someone and they don't answer, you're like, oh, thank goodness.
Yeah. I got
It's one of those things that they called me and they said, hey, there's this company you should talk to. And I turned my car around. I had to drive a half hour the other way, and I was like, yeah, whatever. I'll take any shot at this point in time. And I'm still employed at Nortel. And they introduced me to this little consulting company, 60 people. Next day, I go for an interview at 9 a.m. I interview until 5 p.m. And at the end, the CEO prints out a contract to join this little tiny company. Little did I know that that was my launch and foray into this career that didn't exist in my horizon, called sales engineering. This is where I got picked up by AppDynamics, employee 303. And this is where I now realize the advice that was given to me about the network. I moved to New York. I was given a crazy Northeast patch with a bunch of really cool, amazing sales reps that, we were trying to figure out ourselves. and fell in love with the space. I love sales engineering, being able to work both in the sales organization as well as with technical people on really great technology was really, really amazing.
So, Mick, there might be people listening who don't know what a sales engineer actually is. So, why don't you explain what the role is?
Yeah, yeah. Look, it's a very unique role, and if I'm honest, the role has changed over time. But effectively, it's a role for people who are highly technical, but who also have a bit of a business view of technology. So, what do I mean by that? Even as I was a little kid, I always took apart things, put them back together, had a couple extra screws loose, both there and in my head. But the point of that is like, what is the value of those additional screws? Is it safety, security? Is it some kind of business outcome? And so on. So if you're the kind of person who loves technology and also loves to understand the value that the technology brings to a customer, and you like being in front of customers, you like presenting, you like to find solutions with perhaps things that may not be the best fit, sales engineering career is for you.
Okay, so up until now, we know that you single-handedly brought
Yeah,
down
yeah.
Nortel. You were single-handedly
Yep, I did
responsible
that.
for the failure of Nortel. Great.
I think it's after 20 years, it's okay, right? Like
Yeah,
I'm not gonna get sued
yeah,
anymore.
it's all good.
There's
And then, yeah, then you get rejection by the VCs.
Yep.
Meanwhile, right, this is life. We're learning. You're going through a learning process here. You get this job as an SE. What happens next?
Probably one of the best kind of career moves ever done. I think for me personally, it was possibly the best role for me as my personality. Like I said before, I love going in front of customers. I love travel, and I love tinkering with technology and doing that. And so, for the first 3 years of my Dynamics career, I've been very successful. And look, it's easy to be successful when you're loving it, but also it does help that I was paired up with some amazing sales reps with some really good, great leadership. I learned a lot in that experience, and I was doing really well. And then I decided, maybe I had a little bit too much swagger and not enough humble. But I realized, hey, why don't I become a bit of a leader? And let me tell you, I got rejected 3 times there too.
There we go.
And
Happen.
I think it's funny. Like every time I say this, and even when I started my own business, I thought to myself, well, I get people tell you you're going to reject it a lot before you're going to be successful, but I'm different. I'm going to do it slightly different. I'm going to read all these books. I'm going to be the exception. Nah, you're going to get rejected. You're going to fail. And strangely enough, a couple people bet on me and said, hey, if you want to be a leader, we've got this region that it's all kind of up in a mess. But hey, if you want to try something really hard and prove yourself, go to Singapore and basically manage the Asia Pacific region from Singapore. And I said to them, I don't speak Singaporean. What the hell am I going to do in that like island state? That's how little I knew about the opportunity. But somehow in San Francisco, they ran a campaign around me and convinced me to go.
And in Singapore, they speak a lot of English, right? In the business language, the official language of business
It's all
is
English.
English. Yeah, so your Singaporean was perfect. Yeah.
I did start saying "la" at the end of, but it took me a while.
Now, did you do SC work, management work in Singapore, or did you go actually into sales? And
No,
what's the
no,
difference between like a sales and SE?
no.
I've
It
always
was
been
total
interested in the SE
pre-sales.
part.
Pre-sales. Look, I'll tell you what. The difference between sales and pre-sales is: have you seen the show How I Met Your Mother? And when Barney comes into the bar and he wants to introduce his friend Ted, and he goes up to this beautiful girl and he says, he opens up, he gets her like really excited, laughing and all stuff, and he says, "Have you met Ted?" Well, in sales pre-sales, it kind of is like that. The sales rep kind of opens the doors, gets everybody talking, smiling, laughing, and then, hey, we're gonna talk about this really complex technology. Have you met my SE? And that's when the SE comes in
Gotcha.
and starts doing all the song and dance and get there. So yeah, so it's a technical sales resource that loves the technology and can get the buy-in from technical buying personas in the organization.
Yeah, what's really
Um,
interesting about
yeah.
this whole relationship, because I've gotten to see it a lot throughout my career, I've been in this vendor world for a very long time. And the sales SE relationship is so critical to having a successful venture. The best teams that I've seen are folks that are very much like what you just described with How I Met Your Mother. It's this interplay between the two that really makes for something special and for special meetings and to really get down to the heart of the challenges that are occurring in companies, and to really be able to present solutions to those challenges and dig in and to find the right overall solution. Right, it takes the right team of sales and pre-sales, or we're saying pre-sales, but that is that sales engineer or solution engineer role.
It takes a team, really, because Jim, at the time you were the comp person, and we leaned on you and your team on a lot of things because we couldn't keep up with everything, right? So, and then the post sales people and support people, everybody kind of helps you to be successful. You don't appreciate the big team until you don't have one, and you're trying to do everything on your own. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, no doubt. There was a tremendous team of people. Again, we were in the same company at that point. There were really an absolutely incredible group of people. And interestingly enough, Spencer is also kind of part of this journey with us, because Spencer was a customer of the company, and twice, and was very involved in talking through product and really helping shape where that product was going. So Spencer played a huge role also. So it's interesting. It's not even just the people in the company. It's, all the customers, everyone who touches that company in some way has a tremendous influence over where it's going. Right. So we had just so many great people. I look back on those days and it was just truly amazing. So let's continue along. You've been successful at AppD, and you're looking for more leadership roles. You get to Singapore, and your Singaporean English is fantastic. And what happens next?
Well, the thing is, and this is advice that people tell you, going from an individual contributor to a leader does not necessarily mean success, especially if you're a really good individual contributor. And lucky for me, I think I perform better during the challenging times and when I'm a bit cornered. But you have to understand that I went from IC to a leadership role in a completely different continent, set of countries that I knew nothing about. Look, I'm a European boy, born and raised, educated in the North American style. All of a sudden, I'm landing in Asia, where there's about, depending where we look at it, like 12 different cultures, literally, in countries and things like that. That's the minimum, And I had no idea what I was doing. And I had no support. I had like 2 or 3 bosses changed above me. I was running around with a very, very successful VP who had lots of high expectations, who helped me quite a bit in learning that. But, I was punching above my weight. And, we had a whole bunch of situations happening in India, then, Japan, which was very, very difficult to manage unless you have a really good setup team there, completely different culture. Same in Southeast Asia. I was asked to lay people off right off the bat. Like it was chaos. And then the Australian business didn't really like an American type person coming in leading their team. So lots of different challenges. But the long story of it, I persevered. I worked really hard, and I made a lot of mistakes. And I got to a point where, like, okay, well, I think I got into a really good spot and a really good place. And then we get acquired by Cisco. But up to this point, it was about 3 or 4 years of leading Asia Pacific teams. And even at the end of all that, I still wasn't quite sure if I was doing anything right. Because you don't know. You're kind of in it. You think, oh, maybe I got lucky. Maybe I've got just an amazing team, which I did, which I hired. But, maybe I got the right people at the right time. Maybe it's the support ecosystem. There's so many questions that get in the back of your head of like, okay, I survived 3 years, and the company, the team is in a great spot, but was it just me, or was it everything else around me, right? So while I was really successful, I was a little bit doubting myself, if I'm honest.
Yeah, there's so many people that go through this same exact thing. Yep. Spencer's raising his hand. Spencer,
Yep.
I just call the whole topic imposter syndrome, right? Like, am I
Imposter syndrome.
really successful because I'm capable of being successful, or did I get lucky and I'm around amazing people? Spencer, what was your experience with
Yeah.
that?
I've had it so many different places because you just getting the feedback or knowledge that you are doing well is hard, even if things are working well and you're not sure. You agreed. You're not sure if it's the environment that you were empowered. I mean, air support is actually one of the most important things for me. I've, in my experience, to be able to be successful, whether you're good or not. But yeah, I mean, there's actually in some of my culture work I did at Microsoft, we actually talked about imposter syndrome and what it was across. I mean, you're talking about people paid hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to come do these engineering jobs, and most of them have imposter syndrome. So it's a real thing.
Yeah, I found it. It happens to me pretty much every time I try and move up a level. I'm like, all right, am I really ready to do this? Am I capable of doing this thing? I'm not even sure what I'm supposed to do. So Mick, why don't you jump into your story? What happened next? You feel this imposter
Yeah.
syndrome. What
Well,
happens?
then I get laid off. So imagine how much that validates your imposter syndrome when you get laid off. And the
Yep.
first time I got laid off, I was like, "Oh my goodness!" Clearly, if I was the best or I did really well, I wouldn't be in this situation. And obviously, the first layoff is probably hits you hardest. But I had a really amazing country leader who actually intercepted me on the floor. I mean, I knew I was getting laid off. I mean, it was pretty obvious. I've been at Nortel Networks. I saw how it works. But he gave me some coaching advice. We're still friends to this day, but it was kind of the advice I needed. And then, look, I spent a little bit of time, had a little bit of fun, traveled all over Australia, did some cool things. And then I had the big question mark on top of me. It's like, well, am I really cut to be, a senior director, senior leader that I was, and kind of do it again? And obviously, as you reach out to a lot of different companies, some were out of network and so on. I again was faced with all rejections, and I thought, well, but I've done all these great things. And it wasn't until this other company came along with a really amazing leader. I said no to them twice. They're a competitor. I didn't really want to go for the competitor, but they just had this amazing culture, and I just really leaned into, the good product, good people, and good culture. I was like, I got to give this a try, and but secretly, which I didn't tell them at the time, I was really, really worried because at the very least, when I go to competitor, I don't have to prove that I can, learn the technology, although I really wanted to learn something new. And I don't need to understand or learn a space because I really knew the space really well. But I could go in there and really prove that my leadership skills were exactly what and they needed somebody to help go and rebuild their team. They had to basically do a whole rebuild. And 3-4 years later, in a senior director role, I was able to do it again. And it's the first time that I kind of breathed a little bit and I said, okay, so maybe it wasn't just luck. I mean, I must admit, I always feel there's always a component to it, right? You get the right person to join your team, and all of a sudden you have an anchor in your team. Then you get a second really amazing person. All of a sudden you're on a roll and you're hiring amazing people, and then you kind of make yourself not as useful anymore because you hired an amazing team. And I got to another point, at the end of the relic that I was like, I wouldn't say that it was all skill, but I certainly knew the recipe for how to maybe make this successful. And I kind of got comfortable, which is when I decided to do something crazy again.
So there you go. So now more no's. You had your imposter syndrome.
Yep.
Now you've done
Yeah.
it again. Awesome. So twice successful, fantastic. It probably wasn't luck. Probably wasn't a fluke. You're probably pretty good at this. You have your recipe down, and what's this crazy thing that happens next? What do you do?
Look, going back to the genesis of my story, I've always wanted to start my business. And at the time I didn't have the network, the experience, the all the things that kind of they said that would make me successful. Well, fast forward now, I have all those things. I must admit, I've lost some of that initial naivete, that initial like, let me just go and build something. I don't care if it like so while I got all these new skills, I know I'm missing some of the, this new stuff. And I must admit, I'm pretty scared. Like, I'm taking a massive opportunity cost. I'm not interviewing. I'm putting all my everything into this. I'm giving myself a year to see how far I can push it along. But I've already had so many rejections, so many failures. But there's one big difference this time around. I'm going straight ahead like a train, and I almost expect the next rejection to be around the corner, and I'm going for that corner anyways. And that's a big difference, I think, with time and maybe a little bit of, being beat up a little bit. It's been pretty hard, but you kind of just truck through.
Through all the no's, through all the I don't know what I want to do, through what people would call failures. I'll call them learning opportunities. You had tons of learning opportunities, and you're coming out and you're like, you know what? I'm a glutton for punishment. I'm going to do it again. You're older, you're wiser, and the odds are still stacked against you, right? so
Very
so
much.
this is one of those things where it's being bold. Now you've just gotten bold, brave. Maybe you call it foolish at the same time, but if you don't go for it, you never know, right? And our economy is not in a great place right now, or the global economy is not in a great place right now as well. So, that can work against a company like yours, or maybe it's the perfect time to do something like you're doing. I'm not sure.
It's a good, yeah, it's definitely not like VCs are not lining up to give you money for the stupidest idea, which I feel like, oh, I wish I jumped on that train when it was. But on the other hand, and this is kind of maybe a couple of pieces of advice I want to leave the listeners with, is you got to take a leap sometime, and the timing is never going to be perfect. And you can look at all these things as negative, but there's also positive. For example, yeah, getting VC money right now is nearly impossible. It's really, really hard. You have to have a really good opportunity, and it's really, really hard because everyone's got AI in their title, and it's just nobody's even looking at those companies really. But what's interesting is the network. So going back to the original kind of big ticket item to have is the network and the co-founder that you choose and who you surround yourself with. And the network has been extremely receptive. I mean, I had people that I felt were close friends who disappointed me, and close colleagues who didn't respond to me and completely left me out and dry. And I wasn't asking for money. I was just like, hey, can I get some advice? And just completely ghosted me. And then some people who I didn't expect came out of left field and just, hey, I'll jump on, I'll help you whichever way you need. Doesn't matter what you want. Like, I don't need any stake in your company. I'm willing to help. And maybe because the economy in such way, people are just more willing to help. And so many more people came to me to help me out than I ever expected. And I don't think that will be similar when everything is great and everybody's super busy making money and all this stuff. So I think there's pros and cons of every side of the economic life cycle.
Yeah, it's really cool to hear that people reached out like that. How did they know? How did they know that you were needing help or advice?
Yeah, I did this little bit of a trick. So I mean, I joined this Y Combinator program called Antler, which I highly recommend. It's a great experience to go and meet people, learn how to kind of the art of building a startup and so on and so forth. But the major component to it is go find yourself a co-founder. And again, timing, right place, right time has a lot to do with it. It has nothing to do with a program or anything like that. And I couldn't really find the right co-founder. And because I failed twice and I had the wrong co-founders for this, I became a lot more selective and I didn't really find the right fit. So I actually posted a job ad for a full 50-50 co-founder role. I want to go into, a startup marriage, if you will. So I want to find the best person for the job. And when I put that out there, people really, really reached out. And again, they're like, oh, I don't need the job. I'm curious to see what you're doing. How can I help? Can I introduce you to this other person? I've had, from complete rejections, zero, nobody's talking to me, no customers. I had customers be like, hey, talk to me what you're trying to build. Maybe I can help you. It's been insane. I didn't expect this to go this way.
Yeah.
And from a very lonely startup thing, I ended up having, I have like so many calls every week. And some of them is just for me to kind of feel a little bit better about being, on this journey. And I did identify a couple of interesting potential co-founders as well. So it's been a really, really good, blessing in disguise.
Amazing. All right. Well, so many great life lessons. Thank you for coming on and sharing them with us. The perseverance, it's tremendous to be able to persevere like that. And you've met with great success. So congratulations on that. And best of luck and congratulations on your journey that you're on now. So yeah, that's a wrap for this episode of Triple B. And we hope you join us next time. But until then, have a great day and be good to each other.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Spencer.
Thanks, man.